Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Bob Duff. I represent Norwalk and about 2/3 of Darien and Hartford. With me is State Senator Carl Leone, who represents Stamford and Darien as well. We're glad that you made it out to our post-session community conversation where we can talk about some of the bills that we have passed this year, some things that we're looking ahead in the future, and different ideas that you have. We certainly want to take your questions, and we'll see if we have answers for them or not. We know that we had a long session this year, was January to June. We have a budget that was passed on time. We feel very good about that. We did a number of other bills, including minimum wage. We did paid family medical leave. We did some bills on gun safety and gun reform. We've done a number of other bills about renewable energy, health care, other types of things that I think made it a very productive session. I will say that I know that there's never a good night in September probably to have one of these because there's lots of things going on. And I would say that's probably lots of things going on in any community. And if we picked August, people are away. September, there's lots of things going on. So I don't know, we just try and pick the best date that we possibly can to gather everyone. However, I've had 2 Facebook Live town halls, so we try and find different ways in which we can communicate with folks. Carlo and I are also available via email, phone call. We send out mailers, so we certainly try to be as accessible as we can with the limitations of our own lives, obviously, our work up at the Capitol, our other jobs that we have, our families, things like that. So we certainly try to do the best we can. So with that, again, Carlo can give an intro, and then we can open it up for questions and talk a little bit more maybe about what we did this session. Does he need to have? Yeah.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, I should say. As Bob mentioned, I'm State Senator Carlo Leone. My district covers Stamford and the bottom 1/3 of Darien, which pretty much is what, 95 and south. I think Bob has got the northern side. As Bob mentioned, we're now back in the field, or I should say back in our communities after completing our session that ended in June. We went through the summer month with people finally trying to get a breather from the long session. And as Bob mentioned, we were trying to figure out when was the best date to schedule this little community outreach. I know we had done one during the session. And we tried to get something in August, but August was a little tough with everyone's schedule. I think the library had some events as well for when we had potential dates. So this was the date that we were able to get everyone's calendar between the legislature, me and Bob, and the libraries in terms of availability. I know not as many people might not have been made aware, so whatever we talk here about today, we can then grab that information, get it out to the community, and if any questions come in, especially from anyone who's going to be viewing this on the local channel 79, any questions or comments that need to come our way, just send it to our respective email addresses up at the state capitol, which would be carlo.leone@cga.ct.gov, or the same for Bob Duff at cga.ct.gov, if I remember correctly. So you can send us questions that way, and then we can try to address everyone. So what we've been doing since the session has ended is getting back into the community, trying to stay on top of what's important to everyone in our respective communities, give information as to what we just accomplished, whether they're issues that finally made it through across the line or issues that did not get across the line. I know that we had a couple of topics that were very important to the community here that did not go forward in terms of the regionalization and education. So that was a success from that point of view. And then as we get back into the community, it doesn't mean we don't stay on top of what is important up in Hartford. So there are times when we do have to go back, even while we're still trying to serve our community back home. So our efforts are to try and bridge that gap, take your concerns, stay on top of your concerns, so as we go into the next session, which will start in February of next year, which will be a short session, only 3.5 months versus the 5.5 months. We want to make sure that we stay on top of what's important for our respective communities so that we know what we need to do or not do when we go into the session going forward. So we wanted to take tonight's time and effort to sort of have a two-way conversation, share some information for any questions you may have on what we have done. Bob mentioned a few legislative accomplishments. But there's always more to do. There's always a lot of work. A lot of big ideas take more than just a few years to sometimes pass, whether it's a plastic bags issue that I believe finally just passed. That was a number of years in the making and so forth. And then we have some big policy issues that we have to deal with. I'm chair of the Transportation Committee, so tolls has been a very big issue all across the state, not just here in Darien and not just here in Stamford or Norwalk, but really across the state. And that's still something we're trying to tackle in terms of how do we fund our transportation infrastructure. And when I say big policy ideas sometimes takes time, that is a prime example. So you have those that will support it, those that won't. We haven't had an ability to make too much movement at this point in time. Doesn't mean we can't find a solution down the road, whatever it may be. But the goal is to keep on trying because the need and the problems don't go away. So that's an example of something where it takes multiple years to sometimes find a solution that the public can support and that we can pass as legislators. So that's sort of where I just wanted to kind of frame our conversation going forward. Bob and I are happy to take conversations and questions going back and forth and sort of go from there. So we wanted to keep this sort of loose and sort of have you dictate how you want this conversation to go today.
Yeah, we have till 8 o'clock, so we have some time. We have about 45 minutes to answer questions and things like that. Yes?
Okay, so about the tolls, when the governor was running, he said the tolls would only be applied to the big rigs, the trucks, which I totally agree with, because the way I feel about it, seems like 90% of the accidents on 95 are caused by trucks, and they do all the damage to the roads. Suddenly he became governor and he wants to put toll, everyone should pay a toll, so I'm a little annoyed about that, whether it happens or not, but I feel it was, the idea was good in the beginning, but I don't think it got lost.
Right. I think, well, I don't want to say I think. The governor made his claims and he staked out his position. Once we got into session, our role as a legislature is to really deal with what is required, what is necessary to improve our transportation needs, right? So the costs are quite huge. When the governor finally looked at the numbers, or when his people in the Department of Transportation provided the analysis on what trucks only would provide, it wasn't enough, according to the data, to handle all the needs that was required, right? It wasn't enough revenue that would come in from truck-only tolling, which is the reason why he then pivoted to saying, okay, we need to expand the base, if you will, and say, let's see if we can get tolling for everyone and have the 40% come from out of state, including the trucks. Obviously, that had a political fallout, and we went through the whole session going back and forth on what we should have done or what he could have done versus another. But we in the Transportation Committee took all the analysis, all the data. The numbers were quite justifiable that we need revenue to handle our transportation needs. The gas tax and the current income from the Special Transportation Fund that was developed to handle these expenses down the road is still not enough because it's just been a declining revenue. And so we needed either new revenue or we have to cut costs somehow, which sounds good, but you can't not pay for your infrastructure and your roads. So that has been our dilemma, trying to bridge that delta on how to pay for what you need and how to fund the payment has been the political back and forth where there hasn't been final agreement. So the options were, at the end of the day, to provide a tolling mechanism that would cover our expenses, which is you would pay as you go as you use it, right? We came up with a plan that would give a lot of breaks to the folks that couldn't afford it, using an easy pass, getting a discount, much like other states have done. That was one version on how to fund our infrastructure. The other side came up with prioritizing progress, which they would bond and borrow the money to pay for all the needs that transportation would need, which sounds good in one respect, that sure, let's borrow everything to pay for it, but then all the other borrowing that the state needs to do would get crowded out, and so that would cause a lot of other political issues for down the road. So it's been a back and forth as to what the right priority should be or what combination of those priorities should be. And that's kind of where we are. The governor has not given up on trying to find a solution to transportation. He and his staff have gone to Washington to find out if there's any other opportunity for federal funding to come into play. So we're waiting on words from the feds if that's a possibility to add to the mix. So it's a continual work in progress until we find the right solution. And then we need public support. All right, so 1, 2, and 3. Start from here.
Okay, I have a few comments on tolls. And I know I sent an email to Bob Duff a few months ago on this. My name's Leone. I'm a realtor with Berkshire Hathaway in Layton. I used to do Norwalk, but the Norwalk office was merged with Westport, and there's no way I'm driving from Darien to Westport every day. So, but I want to say as a realtor, I go back and forth between exits 13 every day nonstop. And for me, to be spending $10 on tolls on a day to go back and forth is just going to be ludicrous. And there's other people that are going to have that issue too. Another point I want to
Well, it would not be at $10 a day.
Okay, well, if you're going back and forth, you do, because sometimes, as you know, you got to show, then come back,
Right.
then you show, then you come back. And if you do that 3 times during the day, that adds up. The other thing I want to mention is that Norwalk has the Sono collection opening in November of this year. The Sono collection has Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, and more high-end stores. Westchester County is a prime target for that mall. And the reason why is Westchester County just raised their sales tax in the county to like 8.3%. So that means people that were going to White Plains and are going to pay 8.75% sales tax, and you're going to spend $1,000. Wouldn't you rather come up to Norwalk if there's no tolls and pay 2% less, and you come to the brand new mall, especially if you live in Rye, Larchmont, or Mamaroneck, Orient Point, Purchase. It's just as quick to get to Norwalk as it is to get to White Plains, because White Plains is a mess. So, you know, there are repercussions from doing these tolls, and I think you have to look at the things that are outside the box that are going to impact the toll and impact other municipalities, but it's also going to impact us because the sales tax goes to the state, which comes back to all the other municipalities. So I have a huge issue with that. And those are my comments on the tolls. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Same topic, but from a little bit of a different angle. Thank you so much for coming and for meeting with us. Can you talk a little bit more about what do you feel is the plan? Whether we get the money, we don't get the money, but how should we be using it and how will it impact us here in Darien and Norwalk?
Right, so I'll let Carlo answer that a little more definitively as the transportation chair, but
Right.
just say that federal law says that if you do have a tolling mechanism, that money has to go for transportation and transportation corridor. So it would go for the highways. It couldn't go for something else. I mean, there's a potential that it could go for the trains because the trains are close to the highway. But I think you have to get a little bit of permission to do that because everything has to be in a state of good repair. I believe that's the definition of the federal government. So when the money comes in, it has to go back out to the highways because you're tolling the highways and your transportation system has to be in a state of good repair. So that's one part. So a lot of people think that if you did do tolling, the money would get diverted to something else, which is actually a very big myth because that hasn't happened. And despite what people say, it has not happened. And that the money right now that we have goes into our transportation fund. And what our state and many other states are facing, and you've seen a lot of states in the Midwest and the West, a lot of mostly red states and down south, who have actually been increasing their gas tax. I think Indiana might even be doing some tolling, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So everybody knows, cars are getting more efficient, that whole argument, and there's fewer dollars, and the infrastructure is getting older. So there's a point, even the federal transportation fund is broke because of the money that's from the gas tax is not enough to sustain it. So everybody's kind of looking at different ways in which to do it. I will say also that Connecticut voters, we have in statute a lockbox now, but voters passed a constitutionally mandated lockbox as well. So that provides even more I would say, accountability that money will stay in transportation. I mean, look, we've got a lot of projects. Our issue really has been over the last few years, not so much. It's been money, obviously, because some of the big things you want to do, like for instance, if we wanted to widen I-95 in certain places to 4 lanes, where there's been a study that says if you do this, you can kind of cut off a few minutes. There's actually an article in the papers yesterday about Waterbury where they did it on I-84. People their commute went from like 45 minutes down to 8 minutes because of the 4th lane. You could do that around here, not an entire 4th lane, but a part of it. Those are big projects. You can't do that with the amount of money we have right now.
What specifically,
right.
the toll or no toll or what the funding is, what do you see?
Right.
What transportation improvements would you be proposing if you have the money
right.
to help the residents of Darien?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting at a roundabout way. But so anyway, so that's some of the big projects. Some of the problems we've had more recently has been getting projects out the door because our state government has shrunk so much and we have so many fewer engineers right now at the DOT and others that it's design and build and all that has been taking longer than it should be than it probably had in the past. I think DOT is down about 3,000 employees right now and there's a whole bunch who are set to retire soon. But to your question about what projects we'd like to see, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I'm sure Carlo has a list as well. But you know, I want to see the Route 7 Merritt Parkway interchange finished. That's the next project that I want to see get done. We had that was a promise made that was not kept probably 20, 30 years ago. I'd like to see some of those 4th lanes done, kind of like it's been done in Stamford, a little bit in Norwalk as well, because that will save people. The traffic these days has been utterly unbearable lately, right? So the more we can give relief, we've got, you know, the Metro North, the train system, for probably 20 years, they were so focused on their on-time record that they were too focused on that and not focused on making improvements. So now when people are on the trains and they get delays or the fact that it's taking 10 or 15 minutes longer than it used to is because of all the infrastructure work. A lot of it is because of the infrastructure work that hadn't been done for 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So I would say the trains, because you can take some of the other money, put that in the trains. The toll, if you had tolls, you could do that with I-95, you could do stuff on the Parkway. But I think, and also in addition to that, you got to fix the bridges. We have a lot of deficient bridges in the state. Not that, you know, any are going to fall down tomorrow, you know, God forbid. But the bridges we've got to address as well because those are very, very expensive. And if anybody's been following the Walk Bridge project in Norwalk, that's about a $300 million, well, it's probably about $500 million project. It's ballooned up to over $1 billion only because we're fixing all the old bridges around it that are over 100 years old as well. So East Avenue, Ann Street, Saugatuck Bridge, that are very, very old. The point was to try and do all of those while at the same time while I had economy of scale. So all those things have to get fixed. We can't compete globally if we have an aging infrastructure. This is why other countries are you know, in place to beat us economically because of the fact that we have not invested in transportation adequately the way we should have.
And I guess I'll add a little bit to more of the detail in terms of the Norwalk or Stamford Darien. By improving our transportation infrastructure here locally, it's going to really, if we do it right, if we can do it right, it's really going to help improve how we get around, whether it's locally or having our employees get to work. Just coming here today, the northbound traffic was full, right? Going north was 3 lanes going at low speed, definitely not highway speed. A good example of providing good infrastructure, you've seen it here just locally, the Leone Bridge is being repaired. It's taking a short while, but that was a project that Bob and I pushed to make sure that that was an important project that needed to get done, should have gotten done, and is getting done as we speak. The bridge right over the Cortland, right over I-95 by exit 9, that's in Stamford, but that's right at the Darien door, right? That's a main artery that we all use each and every day. That bridge was extremely deficient, wasn't going to fall down, but if we didn't repair it, it would have fallen down. They were able to put in that bridge span over a weekend ahead of schedule, quite frankly, which was very impressive. I was there when they were doing it just to have proof that it was actually going to go according to plan, so I was pleasantly surprised. And now they're finishing up the paving projects and so forth. By investing in the trains and making sure that we have those working on time, we're holding DOT accountable for the positive train control implementation, so that becomes, I think, in the next 2 years, 2020 and 2021, is for when that is going to be completed, so that if a train happens to be going at a high speed out from under control of the engineer, it will automatically slow down, right? A safety issue. To prevent the kind of tragedies that happen in New York and elsewhere, and even in Connecticut a few years ago. So making sure that we pay for our infrastructure, having the trains run properly, having I-95 right next to us, right going through our communities, widening those lanes where you can widen them. I mean, we've done it at exit 8 in the past. We did it at exit 14. If you can keep that flow of traffic moving, then that helps with making sure that, you know, your daily commute, your local commute is a whole lot easier than what it is currently. So we're never going to eliminate all the problems, but what we need to do is decrease it enough that it makes our lives a lot more pleasurable than what it is today. And most importantly, it's making sure that people that work here locally, whether it's in town in Darien or in Stamford or in Norwalk, anywhere along the corridor, that people can get to their work. Because what people have been doing is having to go further and further away for their homes and then travel here for their work, making that congestion even worse. So as we try to fix our transportation infrastructure, we also then pivot towards our housing costs, our economic costs, so that people can live, work, and play in the communities that they work at, instead of having to drive, you know, 30, 40 miles from their place of residence to where they work. And I know of more than a few that go more than 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 or 3 hours to get to work, whether it's in Connecticut or even from out of state. We have people from the tri-state area that will be coming to Stamford or to Norwalk or Darien for their place of, you know, for where they work, but they live further away, and that adds to the problem. So there's a lot that's going on there. The goal is to fix that infrastructure so you can keep goods and people moving and make sure that it can handle the load going forward, and figure out how to grow for the needs of the future. And that's a tall task, because there's got to be a way to pay for it. So again, that's where the needs are big, and we got to do this in increments, and just make sure that whatever we do, and hopefully we do the best we can with providing the information, so that we can answer the questions, so that the public has the best information to determine if they have the support for what it is we think we can or should be doing.
There's also a plan online that Governor Leone put out. It's a $100 billion plan, and so for specific projects, that's online as well. So there's a lot of work that was done to get that list of projects, and many of them include projects down here. So it's just kind of giving you some big picture stuff.
Okay,
but
so that's still valid and
yeah.
talked about. Okay.
Yes,
Great.
yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and the final thing I wanted to say was, and Bob mentioned it, the whole thing about the trust factor. We'll get the revenue and make sure we spend it the right way, right? So we wanted to make sure that if any revenues come in, and whichever solution we pick, we wanted to make sure that the money for transportation will be paid for transportation. We passed legislation for the lockbox at the state level, so that is pretty much solid, that once the money is in there, you can't touch it. When we had to craft a bill in preparation for potential tolling, we put in language saying, on top of that, the federal statutes to enact tolls says you have to do certain things. Mitigate the corridor congestion, make sure you provide relief to the people that will use the roadways, and thirdly, the money that would be collected has to be spent, must be spent, can only be spent on the roadways for where the tolls would be collected. Once you pay back all the debt and all the infrastructure on that roadway, then those dollars could then be paid could be used in the corridor next to where you collected, meaning the rails, meaning the local roadways. So the transportation dollars would stay within transportation. We would be barred as future legislators to divert that money, because it would be in state statute, and it would be in federal statute, and it would be in the bill of passage. So it would take an extraordinary amount of unanimous support to overturn that, and I don't even think you could, because of the federal legislation. So we tried to tighten up that language as solidly as possible to eliminate the perception whether true or not, but to eliminate the perception that the future dollars would be diverted. We pretty much enacted that that is almost impossible. Ma'am, you had a question.
To this, and you kind of answered it. I was interested to know, because there was a lot of talk of the high-speed rails and the tolls being used for that purpose, but I think you just answered kind of how that would play. So is that kind of tabled for now, that idea
Well,
of the high-speed rails, or it just should be?
Let's get them back to where they were before, like a few years ago. Let's shave 10 minutes off. You know, I think that's our goal right now, is to get the infrastructure, working with Metro North and getting them to do all the work that they have to do. Is kind of like short-term pain for long-term gain. And the short-term pain is what we've been dealing with the last few years, and to hopefully get it where that it is running faster. Commissioner Giulietti, who is the DOT commissioner, has been very good about, he used to be the former president of Metro North when the last guy left, and Howard Permit, and he was the one who kind of was more concerned about on time. And so he's very, very direct and honest about the work we got to do and how we get trains running quicker again. Yeah, that's our goal.
yeah, and I think having the new commissioner, Joe Giulietti, his previous job was president of Metro North, so he's rail-oriented. So, and the problem that we've had, I shouldn't say the problem, but the issues that we've had with Connecticut and New York is that we own the rail line, but Metro North, New York, runs the trains. So we don't have a vote on the Metro North board. We only have, we tell them what we want, and we hope that they work with us. Having Joe Giulietti as now commissioner, who used to be the president of Metro North, he has those relationships that can really be beneficial for us going forward. So that is the hope, and that was one of the reasons why the new governor picked him to be the new DOT commissioner.
Good, Mike, hold that forward.
Thank you for being here tonight. So, as you know, parents and property owners in Darien and many other communities were very relieved and happy when regionalization died in the last session. Do we have to worry about that being an issue in the next legislative session? And what are you going to do to protect our interests?
Well, I think as I said at the last meeting I was here at, there was a great misperception about the ideas that we had. The ideas that we had were basically to say, if there were ways in which we can save money, if there are ways in which we can continue to keep local control, and that we would do it, that we would look for ways in which we could look at either back office functions, that we could look at schools that had, or school districts that had fewer than 1,500 students. That's half the population, half the school districts in the state. And many of those school districts, as I had said, receive millions of dollars, right? There were districts like Andover that receives $4 million in education funding, where Darien, that is a high-performing district that is not losing population, receives far less than that. And so is that really fair to a community like Darien when you have another school district that has a declining population to still keep receiving state funding when we're trying to make things more efficient? So it ended up morphing into, we're taking away local control. We are, and you know all the arguments because I'm sure you're here and that's why you're asking the question. None of those things were true, obviously. And that was not something that would even pass the legislature. So are we going to look at that again next year? I doubt it, because it's a short session, so I would say no. I think we're always going to be looking at economies of scale and how we can do things. Right now, the Department of Administration Services Commissioner is looking at merging some back office functions in state government right now, which will save some money. But our costs in our state are down. We have 16% fewer employees in the smallest state government right now per capita since the late 1960s. As a matter of fact, our state employee costs, even though overtime's up, our state employee costs are down about, I think it's about, I don't remember the exact numbers, 7% or 9%, and if you factor in inflation, it's probably about over 12% or so, maybe 20%. And so our costs are going down. We spend over $1 billion, over $1 billion for municipal aid every year in our budget, maybe more than that even. And so is it a wise use of taxpayer money to have a school district that only has 500 students or that only has 700 students? Is it good for the students are they getting all that they need with these very, very small school districts? So should they have an incentive, or should there be a mechanism for some of them to join together or collaborate or do back office functions? That was never an issue here in Fairfield County because we don't have small districts like that, for one. And two, these are high-performing districts anyway. And they have the things that they need. So I think I've answered your question, but I just wanted to reiterate why that whole issue came up. It wasn't to take away local control. It was to try and increase education standards for our students and their experience, but also look at how we can save precious taxpayer dollars. Because in theory, when I'm meeting with constituents, everybody always says we need to save money. We need to make our government smaller. We need to be more efficient. And when you bring up ideas, sometimes the theoretical is one thing, the actual is something else.
I agree with Bob in the sense that I don't think much is going to happen with that in the next session with regionalization as it was promoted or how it was perceived. I think the ongoing conversation is how do we fund our education and how do we fund it fairly and how do you pay for it and give the communities the monies that they need is still an open and valid question. So that discussion will continue. The idea of the regionalization that was going to be forced upon and using a heavy stick, everyone pretty much heard the voices that rose up and said, this is not the right way to go. And to me, that's the democracy in action, right? Ideas get proposed all the time, not just by us, but by other fellow legislators and by the governor and by just about anyone that wants to promote an idea. If it gets filed, it's something that we then have to discuss to determine if there's merit. So when those bills were first proposed to address the need on how to fund the education issues, it quickly exploded into the regionalization aspect, the ticketing, the heavy stick perspective, instead of trying to use the approach of how can we do it where it makes the most sense. The good thing is that democracy worked. People rose up and said, heck no, to put it mildly, and we listened and we heard, and there was not enough support to go forward. So I think we took it for what it is, because when we're up in the legislature, we went through over 10,000 proposals this year in terms of ideas. Obviously, we could not pass all that. We have to vet the ones that have legs, get rid of the ones that don't make any sense, and push forward the ones that do. And that's what we do each and every year. So there hasn't been a year where there hasn't been an issue that's been very political, very complicated, very non-public support, but you have to go through the process to determine how far you can go. So I think that's kind of how we took that whole approach last year. Again, it's a short session. We don't have the time or the effort or the energy to try and come up with something that's going to make people happy to force that down people's throats. So I don't see that happening. But do I see the idea of how do we address education and how to do it in the best way? I think that's going to continue. And you'll see ideas that are going to be proposed that you may support, and you'll see ideas that will get proposed that you might not support. And that's where we'll have these continuing conversations to try and vet which way we should go.
Right. So for example, special education is still a big issue, and funding, excess cost. So, you know, again, when you have a pot that's finite on how to spend money, you say, do these small school districts, should they still receive the same funding? Or if we were to use some of that money on these declining school districts for other types of education needs, that's a question. That's a valid question. So whether it happens or not is a different story, but those are some of the kinds of things that get discussed in the legislature. Who's next? Somebody in there. Barbara, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, anybody else?
Now you have to ask something.
I know, right? Barbara has never been. Oh, was it Mark? Sorry.
Well, I had second thoughts, but since I've been called on, I have a brief suggestion and then a question, if
Okay.
I may. When we finish doing the railroad bridge over
Which-
the harbor in Norwalk,
Yep, Walk Bridge, yeah.
yeah, that's changed the name.
Yeah, it might,
It's a railroad bridge.
yeah.
It's very confusing.
Not the
I know.
one where you walk over.
Now, how's that project coming? That's my question.
Okay, so do you know why it's called the Walk Bridge? Because it's
We're
just,
going to call it the Duff Bridge.
depends how it comes out. it's called the Walk Bridge, 'cause I think it's just DOT lingo because they shorten it out. I think it's Norwalk Bridge 1 or something like that, so
It's
it's,
named after somebody.
yeah, no, it's just Norwalk Bridge 1 or something. It's really not named after anything, so.
I think the Duff.
So then how's the project coming? As far as I know, and we receive pretty regular briefings with the DOT. I haven't received one in the last few months, but the last one I did receive, everything's moving along. I mean, there's little delays here and there. There was that court case that got thrown out by the federal court that could potentially have not stopped it, but kind of delayed it. There have been some delays that have pushed things back a little bit. I think they're probably, I think maybe 6 or 8 months behind, and that some of that had to do with acquiring some of the properties or getting the right permits. There's so many moving pieces in that. They've got to move the Eversource electrical lines, and then they've got to knock down the Maritime, the IMAX theater, move that over. So things are moving along. I think it's it's still going to happen, and it's still going to go forward. I always remind people that when the Walk Bridge, not the Walk Bridge, but anything happens on the northeast corridor for Amtrak, if it's down, so say the Walk Bridge is down or something's down in Philly or New York, it's a $100 million hit to the economy per day. So that's a very, very big number, which is why this bridge is so important. And so I think it's again, if you're going to try to have a 21st century economy, you can't do it with a 19th century bridge. You've got to make sure that you have your infrastructure that's up. And anybody who's ever been to Shanghai has ridden the maglev train that goes 200-something miles an hour. You know what I'm talking about. And those are very expensive, and it's not a very long train. But it shows you that if you just continue to do the same old, you're not going to get anywhere. You've got to think ahead, and you got to think big in order to have a growing economy. So, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Hi. How are you?
Hi. You did a Facebook Live earlier this week, and you mentioned, I think if I have it correctly, that there could possibly be 1 or 2 special sessions.
Mhm.
And I was just wondering, do you know that's going to happen? What would the topics be?
Right.
What are special sessions like?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Good question. Thank you. Good to see you again. You too, Ian. How are you? The topic is on special session because again, it's funny. So many people I talked to got my oil change yesterday and the gentleman said, I've just been hat and shorts, and I said, I'm heading up to Hartford tomorrow, and he said, I said, you probably think we're going back for a fall session, right? He's like, yeah, absolutely. I said, no, legislature's out till February. I said, we all have other jobs, and we've got to do that, and that's kind of the way most state legislatures are set up. So there's 2 topics right now that probably need to be addressed before the end of the year. One is our bonding. To do a bond bill, because right now there's nothing there that allows the governor to borrow money at the same time when interest rates are at historic lows. And so whether it's for paving or whether it's for buying new equipment or whether it's for building affordable housing or whether it's for fixing community colleges or whether it's for whatever it is, there's nothing there, so we can't have a bond commission meeting. So we've got to do that. And the second thing is, we have an agreement with the hospitals, and so we're just waiting for the language to get worked out on the hospital lawsuit that happened under the previous administration. There's a settlement, and getting that buttoned up and voted on. So we're targeting the end of September for that. Whether it happens or not, we'll see. But those are the 2 things, kind of the musts for this year right now. Yep, as far as I know.
Is it possible that other issues can be pulled into it, or is it solely like this is what you're there for? And that's it?
No, it's possible. It's possible. How likely it is, it's hard to say. There was a bill vetoed by the governor on restaurants, and so that's a possibility if there's a deal worked out on that, an agreement from the various parties. I haven't seen anything yet on it, so that's certainly a possibility. And but I suppose it's always possible. You can't ever say never, right, on anything. But those are the 2 things what people are focused on right now.
Yeah, in terms of special sessions, I prefer that we don't have many of them because we are a part-time legislature, and the special sessions are usually for when something that should have gotten done and hasn't gotten done but must get done is for how I like to see a special session come up if it's necessary. So to the point of the bonding that needs to get done, that is hugely important, not just for the historical lows that you could borrow at this present time, but for what bonding has to do, right? I mentioned earlier the school construction, housing needs, transportation, economic development, schools. The list is quite long. And that's things that we should be doing on an annual basis. And if we don't keep that pipeline open, then it's everything that's in the pipeline that hasn't yet done starts to fall off, and to restart is more expensive when you come back to it. So we don't want to do that. The hospital is very important because that's something that we came to an agreement. We just ran out of time. It's always possible to open up special sessions for other issues, but that's dangerous because then you don't want to have special sessions be normal because you have a time frame that you're supposed to get everything done. So all the leaders, excuse me, I could use that word. All the leaders and the governor, both on the Republican side, Democratic side, would have to agree for anything that would be added. And that's a high bar because you just don't want to open up sessions because someone has a pet project that they want to get done. It's really for only things that were super critical and has to get done and should have gotten done.
Right. Right. So that's where. And the other thing I would just say is that it's tough to get people there all the time because everybody has other jobs. And so, we know January through June, kind of got to be there, right? February through May next year, kind of got to be there. September, you don't know, how do you know? So people may have vacations, they may be away, they may have a conference to go to. I mean, who knows?
And that's right, with the special sessions, it's not mandatory that everyone be there. So people have other lives, they have vacations, they have families, they have work projects to get accomplished. So you have to make sure you have the quorum and you have the necessary votes to pass these things. During the normal session, you really don't have that excuse not to be there. So there are times that they have to schedule, and the scheduling sometimes can be difficult. Much like when we tried to schedule this earlier, it didn't work for the summer reasons, right? It holds true the bigger the problem.
Okay. So you got about 12 minutes. Rob?
There were 2 items that were discussed in the last legislative session that would have, that if passed, would have a material negative impact on our town. One would be the transfer of the personal property tax on automobiles to Hartford. And the second would be the passing of the current, I don't know that I have the right pension lingo right, but the current period portion of teachers' pensions to the municipality proper. So taking the current year portion of the pension payment obligation for the town of Darien and having us pay that separate and apart from our regular taxes. So I was just curious, sort of, what are the state of both of those items at the moment?
They didn't pass, so dead. If there's
they're dead, but there's talk amongst you all, and
not amongst me.
There's rumors and other things like that.
Yeah.
Are we going to see them again next session?
Yeah, hard to say. I mean, there's I don't know. You may have a legislator who thinks that's an important issue, and they may bring up the idea. The thing about the short session is that individual legislator cannot raise an individual bill unless it's budget related. If it's not budget related, it has to be brought up as a committee bill. So there's fewer bills. However, somebody could say, "Hey, Senator Leone, would you mind raising this idea as a committee bill because I can't do it as an individual bill?" So if you're asking if we know whether any of the other 185 legislators will raise a bill on a particular topic, no, not at all. But the idea of the property tax for cars, which I think should be eliminated personally, has been raised a bunch of years and has not garnered support by a majority of legislators. The teachers' retirement one is one that I don't think, I mean, it could, I just don't think it may come back anymore because of the fact that, I don't want to say never because you can never say never, and we don't know, I don't know. But the fact that we re-amortized the debt and took $300 million out of the rainy day fund and put it in a separate account, which satisfied the bondholders. And so we're not going to have that $6 million cliff like we were going to have. It's more flat now. I think that solves a lot of the problems that was concerning for governors, because it came from the governors. and maybe some legislators as well. I will say, on that issue though, Connecticut is, I think, only one of 2 states that pays the entire employer portion of teachers' retirement costs. So we're an outlier when it comes to that. Now, we don't have county government, nor do we have county school districts. So the state picks up the tab of that, which is about $1.1 billion per year, which nobody sees because we just pay the bill. So should, the debate still is, should a community pick up some of the portion or some of the future portion of those costs? That's the debate. Whether that comes up or not, I'm not sure, because of the fact that what we did this year, which is what we did with the state employees' pension, which is re-amortize it, which gives us a little more cushion, breathing space, and the fact that it doesn't set that cliff up as it did, which was a completely unsustainable cliff to pay.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think, I don't have any intention of following those bills, but it doesn't mean another colleague won't, because they may support it and believe it, and if it comes up, we'll have to address it accordingly. So anything is possible in terms of what issue could be filed. But I think with the short session, it would have to go through the committee, which makes it a little bit harder to raise an individual bill. So if that were raised in terms, it would be through the education committee, which means you would have some support on the committee to take it up as a possible bill to be debated and flushed out. So that's always a potential. And that's not a bad process to go through, because you can then decipher what shouldn't happen and what should happen and try and figure out what the solutions are. So it just takes time that we don't always don't have, because you can't tackle big issues in 5 months that needs to handle the state for a 10-year time frame, either whether you're looking back or going forward. So sometimes these issues take just a lot of effort and a lot of time in terms of years sometimes to try and figure out what the best course of action is and get that support to go forward.
Okay.
Just on a separate note, I just need some education, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In the event that that tolls do pass and the revenues from the tolls go to the lockbox system that you've described, what happens to the revenue from the gas tax in the state? And does the gas tax revenue also go to the lockbox?
Yes.
Only for use?
Yes.
So in the current legislative session, was some portion of the gas tax utilized to fund the general fund?
No.
No, it's in the special transportation fund. It goes to for transportation. The problem with the gas tax is that since the early 2000s, it's been flat. When we last reduced the gas tax, not increased the gas tax, we reduced it. When the dollar, when the gas was much more expensive at $4 per gallon, revenue was coming in, so we reduced the gas tax nominally. But since then, it's been flat. And because it's been flat, those declining revenues has exacerbated the problem as you have more people on the roadways and so forth. The demand has continually increased with less and less revenue contributing to supporting this special transportation fund. That's been a national model in terms of what's been happening. So you have states across the country raising the gas tax, the federal gas tax and state gas tax, and implementing tolls, things that we have not done for at least 20 years. So we've been shortchanging ourselves because we haven't kept up with how to manage the demand on how to maintain everything. So that has been our dilemma. But the short answer to your question is the gas tax, if and when tolls or any other funding mechanism passes, it would stay in transportation to be spent on transportation because of how we crafted the bill and because of the state statute and how federal dollars would dictate it.
Okay. 2 more. I think we probably have time for 2 more. Yep.
I'm just wondering, how is the personal property tax applied? Where is it applied?
Just to local government. It's funded.
It
It's
seems like it should have something to do with transportation.
doesn't. No. It's just for the local government. Yeah.
Yeah, and on the property tax, it's interesting because really the 3 big main drivers for the state is the income tax, the sales tax, and the property tax. We can control at the state level the state tax and the income tax. We really can't control the income tax because that's, the property tax, because that's the local driver. Now, there's ways to have state dollars come in and offset or have it increase, but if you decrease one, you have to increase the others to maintain the overall revenue. In terms of the car property tax, right? When we were trying to eliminate the car property tax, because that's such a nuisance for everybody, and different towns have different property taxes for the same vehicle, we were trying to figure out how to eliminate it or how to make it more fair. But believe it or not, the entities that cried out the most were the towns that relied on that local property tax for their automobiles, that if that got eliminated or it decreased what they were able to generate locally, if we weren't able to make up the difference, that would have been a shortfall in their revenue stream because the property tax is local. So we're constantly in this, if we do this, we have to do that, and who gets hurt in the process. So trying to fix a problem over here may create one over there, and that's what we've constantly been muddling through, trying to figure out how to do this. But the property tax, we would love to eliminate it, but we can't because it's the only local mechanism for the local municipality. So here in Darien, the mill rate is set by your local government. And if we were to take that tool away from them, they would have to scramble to figure out how to make up the difference. And it would not go over well, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. One thing I do want to mention to folks that probably will come up next year as an issue that definitely will impact Darien is the notion of a payroll tax. It's something that happened in New York. And you can go on the School Finance Project, that's their website, and look up a lot of data on the payroll tax. Now, the whole idea about the payroll tax is to try and figure out ways in which to provide tax relief because of the SALT cap that the federal government has put in place. And the payroll tax basically would, for most people, would eliminate the income tax. The employer would pay the tax, which would be a smaller tax than the income tax, and there are certain benefits for the employer to pay that tax for them, federal benefits. I cannot give everybody all the wonky information about it because we're all still kind of learning it ourselves and trying to get through it. There was a push last year to try and to do it very quickly, but not everybody can get their arms around it. It's too big of an idea, so there's a study going on right now with some legislators and some other folks, so we'll get a report back and figure it out. But I would just encourage everybody to start looking at that issue. Now, for higher end earners, there would probably still be there could still be a income tax, but it could go down to like 2%, coupled with the employer tax. But the way it's been described is that everybody pays less, and more money actually comes into the Connecticut Treasury, into our general fund. So it's an idea. I just want, since we're here, we have channel 79, and I wanted to make sure that people are at least thinking about it. Again, just type in Connecticut payroll tax, you can Google it or whatever, and there's different sites, different news articles about it, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because we did pass legislation a couple years ago to allow municipalities to set up kind of a nonprofit to kind of help get around the SALT caps for property taxes, for all of our taxes, but that was knocked down by the IRS. So New York has a payroll tax that I think they've implemented or they're implementing soon. Other states, may do the same kind of a thing. So it's just an idea that's out there right now that may come forward. So just a heads up as an issue that may or may not come up, but I know it's being studied and it's being talked about right now. A lot of things do happen in the interim. There's a lot of various study committees and task forces and other types of things. So just as an example, even the Dalios gave money, the Dalio Foundation gave money to the state. The state had to put in $100 million over 5 years. They're putting up $100 million of their own money, plus raising another $100 million, and that's to go to social and emotional well-being for students around the state. So it's in various schools. They worked at Tracy School, I know, in Norwalk. I don't know if they've worked at any schools here in Darien. I know they've worked at some schools in East Hartford, so kind of all over the place. He was on 60 Minutes too, talking about it, so that's something that's happening as well. So we have time for one more question if anybody else has any questions. If not, we'll just go. Yep.
In listening to all your answers, it sounds like the state is doing its best to deal with a fiscal, I don't want to say crisis, but that's the best word that comes to my mind. And of course, I think that a response to that situation is to try and bring more commerce into the state so that there are more monies coming into the coffers of the state, and thereby could bring back possibly some of the aid that was coming to Darien that's been eliminated. So I'd like to know what measures, what steps is the state of Connecticut taking to try and do that, because Connecticut as a state does not rank very high with business. Businesses have been leaving, people have been leaving. So what is going to happen to stem the tide of that trend?
Yeah, I think we're on a little bit of a turnaround. We just still have a long way to go. You have the governor with a new commissioner of DECD that comes from a financial background. So we're relying heavily on his expertise to use the private sector, leverage the private sector to bring in business here. The Commerce Committee has passed several pieces of legislation to be a little bit more business friendly, such as eliminating the business entity tax with a $250 fee every year. So even though it was a hindrance from a business perspective, it was just a sore thing for anyone who has a small business. So that got eliminated. Bringing in other businesses from across the state is important. The state's currently working on a huge wind deal in New London that can bring in all sorts of electricity revenue and wind revenue and so forth as we try and become more green. It's those kind of projects that they're trying to bring to the state. There's always more to be done, and economic development is key to it. As we lost the financial sector from the downturn, they're starting to come back slowly but surely. Our economic rainy day fund has increased, so we now have a small surplus on an annual basis. So we want to make sure that we're doing that in the right way. The volatility tax that we passed a few years ago is preventing us from overspending, and that has contributed to putting in money into the rainy day fund. So the governor, coming from a business mindset, he's using his expertise. He's going out there utilizing his contacts. He's created a couple of task forces to do just what you said, how to bring in more business activity here. I think that'll have some legs down the road. And I'll step back to the transportation infrastructure being on the committee and the chair. If we improve our transportation infrastructure, that will have a direct impact on the economy. It's just that crystal clear, at least to me, that where goods and people travel without a lot of downtime, economic activity occurs, and then businesses will want to come here. One of the reasons why some businesses either won't come or have left is because of the congestion, that they don't want to live through that, and they want to make sure that their people can get to work. So if we can address that somehow, some way, that will go, in my mind, a long way towards providing that economic opportunity and getting us from the bottom of the list higher up the list. So,
Yeah, so
it's a long ways to go.
Yeah, and let me just mention one quick couple things. So there's not always any answer on how to do all this stuff, right? So there's small things and big things. So small things, so setting up captive insurance, having the state set up mechanisms so that captive insurance companies can come in and settle and do that. We did that a number of years ago, and we have lots and lots of jobs for that. Hartford, 2 tech companies are coming in, plus we have the financial, what's the fintech campus that's setting up on the old Yukon Law place. So those are some things that are happening. I mean, but then there's the big things like transportation, education, secondary education, affordable housing. Our sweet spot has always been the fact that we live between New York and Boston, and that we have the most educated and most highly productive workforce in the nation. You can't have that if you have 40 or 60% of your kids in the cities who are not graduating with the required skills. You can't do it. You can't keep doing it. So we live in a very competitive world, as you know, and we live in a world that requires a highly educated workforce, which is why we have so many job openings at Pratt & Whitney, we have so many job openings at Electric Boat, we have job openings at Sikorsky and the manufacturer pipeline that we have. So all those things kind of contribute to, what do we do? Some of those surveys I think are bogus because they look at the fact that we're not right to work, and they look at the fact that we have high employee costs. Well, we have high employee costs because of the fact that we have educated, smart people who actually work here. And actually, what do you know? They want to get paid for the job that they do based on their education. So yes, that does mean that we have higher employee costs. But I think for us, we've also taken other steps, such as when people retire, we kept our promise on reducing taxes, eliminating taxes on Social Security income, on pension income, raising the estate tax up to $5 million, the threshold. So all those things, I think, make a difference to the future of our state. And again, it's never one thing. It's always a bunch of things that contributes to the well-being of our state and our economy, and how many some of those hard decisions we want to make. And don't forget too that we have cut billions of dollars in discretionary funding in our state budget. We have cut our workforce. We have cut our costs, our employee costs, and everything else. So state government has shrunk. We've made it more efficient. We have cut a lot down to the bone, which is why Darien and others have seen smaller reimbursements for things like education, which I prefer not to have. But a lot of that has been because nobody ever complains when you're not doing the hard stuff. They only complain when you're doing the hard stuff. And the hard stuff was actually paying down our pension debt that had been ignored for 50 years. But paying that down and making new agreements with state employees for higher health care contributions, higher pension contributions, reducing the size of our workforce, automating some more of the workforce. Those are the things that are controversial, but those are the things in the long term that save money, and that's why you do it. And you get a handle on that stuff, and then you can make the investments that you need to make. You can cut the Social Security taxes, cut the pension taxes, and provide a state that has a highly educated workforce, and you're not, people are going to move if they want to move, but it's not forcing people to move, and I think that's the idea that we want to do. So, all right, we're past 7 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.
You said 8, no, it's 7? You said 8.
7 o'clock.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
You
It's
said
7 on the
8,
thing.
but you said 8.
Okay. I apologize. It's 7. I got to go pick up my kids.
What I would say is if anyone has some ideas that we haven't approached, or if you think there's a way to bring in business here that we haven't thought of, that's what we also can do. Like, we don't have all the solutions off the top of our head, so a lot of these ideas for legislation come from constituents. So if you think a business that wants to come here and is having a hard time, we can help foster that. Or if you think we should promote a certain idea for possible legislation, then reach out to us, because then I can vet it with Bob and our colleagues to say, is this something worthwhile doing? Going to the committee of cognizance and say, here's an idea, let's run with it. So I offer that to anybody. If you have ideas, let us know. It's not always us coming up with legislation. It comes from constituents just like yourselves.